Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's JPR, and welcome back to part 2 of the worst types in every region. This time we're covering the last 4 regions, being Unova, Kalos, Alola, and Galar. So if you missed part 1 featuring the first 4 regions, make sure you check that one out first so you're acquainted with how we're doing this. And again, make sure you're subscribed so you're in the loop when we eventually drop the best types for every region. We gained over 1,000 subscribers with the last video, and now only 80% of you guys watching aren't subscribed rather than the usual 90%, so that's awesome. But we still got work to do on the march to 100k, so if you've been enjoying these videos so far, then be sure to help me out with that. Every sub counts. But anyhow, I assume since most, if not all of you already know how things operate around here, let's jump right back into things with the Unova region. Now, Unova is a lot harder to determine since it's one of the only regions with 2 separate sets of gyms. I guess the good news for me is that I don't have to determine Chili, Silent, or Cress, and Lenora just ends up being replaced by Charon as the normal type gym leader, so yay for that. We will be looking at both iterations of Unova as their own independent thing though, because there are quite a few varying factors. Now, just mapping things out by gyms alone, it's quite clear that this is going to be a tight competition between the Grass type and the Psychic type. In the base Unova region from Black and White, both types lose to 5 type specialists and win against 1 each. They are identical in those categories. However, in Black and White 1, I do believe that Psychic type is marginally worse than the Grass type. First of all, if we remove the mythical Victini and Meloetta from the pool, Psychic has Musharna, Swoobat, Sigilyph, Gothitelle, Reuniclus, and Behem to choose from. Most of these are just perfectly average Pokemon to use during the main story, nothing amazing. Grass may not have a ton going for it either, but at least they have Serperior, Whimsicott, and Ferrothorn, who are all very versatile in their own ways. But what ultimately does them in is the numerous battles against Team Plasma and Ghetsis. Team Plasma uses an absurd amount of Dark-type Pokemon throughout the main story, mostly Krokorok, Scraggy, and Lightheart. Yes, they commonly use Trubbish as well, but it's the least common of those 4. In N's 5 battles throughout the story, he uses a grand total of 19 different Pokemon species, but only his Timburr in the second battle loses to Psychic, all while he uses numerous Pokemon such as Sandile, Scraggy, Joltik, Klinklang, and Zoroark, who all have a favorable matchup against Psychic. Meanwhile, Ghetsis, who turns out to be the true final boss of the game, has 3 Pokemon that outright beat Psychic, being Cofagrigus, Bisharp, and of course his ace, Hydreigon. He also packs the move Crunch on his Electros. Outside of Team Plasma, Psychic type's 3 weaknesses, being Bug, Dark, and Ghost, are considerably more numerous in Unova than almost any other region, making up roughly 1/3 of the Unova Pokedex. It's very hard to go more than a couple battles without running into something that Psychic is weak to in this region. On the gym side of things, Psychic loses to Berg's bug types. They don't fare well in Clay's gym due to Krokorok being the most common Pokemon throughout that area. They lose to both Chantal and Grimsley in the Unova League, and yes, he may be a post-credits battle only, but they also lose to Champion Alder, who carries 3 bug types on his team. But we're not done. There's still Black 2 and White 2 Unova to consider. And actually, I think things sway in the opposite direction here. Psychic gets a bit better due to the return of some heavy hitters such as Espeon, Starmie, and Metagross. Grass, on the other hand, loses to 3 newly introduced trainers, Roxy, Colress, and Iris. I know Iris technically isn't a new trainer, but she is like her own thing in these games now, so just roll with it. It's still relatively close though, because Grass does get a win on the new gym leader Marlin, whereas there aren't any Psychic-type Pokemon available by the time you fight Roxy, so sadly we're forced to call that as even. On top of the 3 trainers mentioned earlier, Grass loses to Berg, Skyla, and Drayden, though their enemies Bryson and Alder from the originals are no longer around to torment them, so it's not all doom and gloom. While Team Plasma still uses a considerable amount of Dark types in the sequels, Poison types are just as prominent on their teams this time around, thanks to the return of Golbat, Weezing, Muck, and Drapion, making things a bit better for Psychic and a lot worse for Grass. All things considered, Grass and Psychic are still incredibly close together in Black 2 and White 2, but I'd say Grass is slightly worse this time around, mainly due to which older Pokemon came back and which ones didn't. At the end of the day though, it's very tight, and averaging the 2 incarnations of Unova together, it's a clean tie between them for the dishonor of the worst type. Moving ahead to the Kalos region, this one is fortunately not going to require nearly as much college-level studying to figure out, as it's pretty clearly the fighting type. Now, don't get me wrong here, there are plenty of really good fighting types in the Kalos region. They also hand you a Mega Lucario for free and watch gleefully as you terrorize the entire region with it. So just know the issue here is not at all with the Pokemon themselves. In fact, if we're talking purely species here, then Ghost is probably the worst, since other than Gengar, Golurk, and Aegislash, who buddy, that is one mighty big asterisk right there. Most of the ones in this region aren't great, but Ghost actually has a perfectly acceptable 1-0 record against all of this region's type specialists, so it's not the worst. Fighting, on the other hand, has to overcome a number of hurdles throughout Kalos. Starting at the first gym with Viola, where a majority of the Pokemon in the gym will actually have a double resistance against fighting-type moves. They make it past Grant no sweat, but are at a slight disadvantage against Karina since her ace happens to be Hawlucha. Many of the grass types in Ramos' gym also have some dual typing that gives them an outright advantage against fighting as well. Valerie and Olympia, they straight up lose against, no real debate to be had here. They do beat Wolfric though, but in all honesty, that's like bragging you beat your kid sibling in Smash Brothers. Wolfric might be the biggest pushover of a gym leader in a region full of pushover gym leaders. I'd like to call Wickstrom a W, but realistically they only beat his Probopass. Caesar is even, while Klefki and Aegislash are straight L's. This one might be another overall loss. Malva is a slight loss. While fighting does take care of her Pyroar, Chandelure and Talonflame are right there to knock you down a peg. All of Drasnus Pokemon except Druddigon have some answer against fighting types. They are in for a pretty rough match here. Same goes for Seabold, they beat Barbaracle, but the other three, not looking so hot. Finally, Champion Diantha. While fighting will help you out against her fossil Pokemon, especially Aurorus, Hawlucha, Gourgeist, and her ace Gardevoir make this overall not favorable for the fighting types. In total, fighting wins 2 matchups, loses 9, including all 5 members of the Kalos League, a first-time accomplishment for any type thus far, and goes even with the Lumiose gym only. Okay, so Alola is another one that I thought would be tricky since I have to average how each type performs against each trial in both the base Sun and Moon games as well as the Ultra games, but good God, I did not expect what I was gonna find here. Remember how I said no type would ever top how bad Grass was in Johto? Yeah, I might have been wrong about that. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. Psychic types lose a staggering 12 matchups across the Alola region. Let's not waste any time because this is going to be a loaded one. So right off the bat, we have to consider both Totem Gumshoos and Totem Raticate depending on which version you play, but it actually doesn't matter as much as you may think due to the fact that Totem Gumshoos also carries the Dark-type move Bite. There are many Psychic types available by the first Totem, but the only ones that will make it through relatively unscathed are NK and Mime Jr. The majority of them will not make it. They do get a win against Kahuna Hala, yippee, but don't get used to it. While Totem Wishy-Washy in Sun and Moon was a perfectly neutral matchup for Psychic types, the replacement Totem Araquanid in the Ultra games is anything but. Araquanid already carries a super effective base 70 power Leech Life, which is absurdly strong for that point in the game, in addition to having 2 allies that both know Bug Bite. The Fire Trial I will call as even, since in base Sun and Moon, Psychic beats Totem Salazzle, but they will not fare as well against Totem Marowak in the Ultra games. Rather than split this in half, I figured in this case it would be easier to just call it neutral. Totem Lurantis is a slight L due purely to the fact that it carries X-Scissor. There's not really any opening where Psychic has an advantage, even against the allies. Olivia I will also have to call as an L due to Ultra Sun and Moon adding Anorith/Armaldo to her team on top of her already having Probopass who resists Psychic and Lycanroc who learns Bite/Crunch. And if you want to go the extra mile, then her Alolan Golem in Sun and Moon also has Steamroller, a Bug-type move. Even though the Electric-type totem changes in the Ultra games, both results are the same. Vikavolt will easily dispose of any Psychic types in the premises, and while Togedemaru isn't as threatening towards Psychics, it's still not a winning matchup. Totem Mimikyu is a total loss, though it is a bit easier in base Sun and Moon since its allies are Haunter and Gengar, who are at least weak to Psychic. In Ultra Sun and Moon, though, this hole gets patched up with Banette and Jellicent, definitely the worst trial so far for the Psychics. Island Kahuna Nanu is just as bad as you can probably imagine, being the first Dark-type specialist in the series outside of the Pokemon League. I can only call Totem Komolo a very slight win for Psychic, since the first ally he calls happens to be Caesar, who can easily KO you with a simple X-Scissor. What ultimately saves this trial though is how underleveled Caesar is in the regular Sun and Moon games, plus the second ally in those games is just an unthreatening Hakomowo. Totem Rabombi, who is exclusive to the Ultra games, is a big L, as you'll be forced to overcome a combination of Quiver Dance and Bug Buzz. Hapu is just another slight loss, as the Ultra games add Golurk to her team and the move Payback to her Mudsdale. In the league, you lose 3 out of the 4. Mullane and Acerola are self-explanatory, and we already touched on Olivia. And oh yeah, ya boy Guzma exists too, a pure Bug-type user, where the only silver lining for Psychics is, Well, at least his Team Skull lackeys only use dark types half the time and poison the other half. And we haven't even touched on the Aether Foundation yet, which, while they don't specialize in any particular type, almost none of them use any Pokemon weak to Psychic. In fact, many of the Pokemon they use either resist or are immune to Psychic altogether, especially in the Ultra games. Man, that was a long list. Now, as you can piece together, things are slightly better for the Psychic type in the original Sun and Moon games. In fact, I'd say Dark even gives them a run for their money as the worst type, since you have to fight Hala twice in those games. But ultimately, it's the Ultra games that tip Psychic types far over the edge. They're an outright handicap in those games. They lose so many matchups. At the very least, most of the Psychic types in the Alola decks are pretty good, but I'd say most of the Pokemon in general in the Alola decks are pretty good. Plus, you have access to all 18 types on the first island alone, so why settle for less? Still, although it by far has the worst record of any type in any region, I'm not entirely convinced that it's worse than Grass is in Johto, but it's arguable for sure. And now we've finally arrived in the Galar region, where once again we have to take a look at a fractured set of gyms. In Sword, Dark type is a bit underwhelming since you don't have access to a winning matchup against Alistair, instead having to fight B, who Dark types lose against. In Shield, Flying type is noticeably worse than it is in Sword, losing his battles against B and swapping Gordy out for Melanie, who is just as bad. But there's one type in both games that stands above both of those as the worst: the Rock type. Rock types will start off the game very shakily, losing back-to-back against Milo and Nessa before getting a brief break in Kabu's gym. However, in Pokemon Sword, Rock goes right back to the losing column against Gym Leader B. In Sword, Rock also has to fight against Gordy, which isn't a bad matchup by any means, but I think they'd much rather take the winning matchup against Melanie in Shield. Raihan's gym is also no good for Rock types. Not only does Raihan utilize ground types just as much as he does dragons, but his signature Pokemon Duraludon is part steel as well. In the league, Marnie is also problematic for Rock types, between her Scrafty, Toxicroak, and Morpeko carrying Bullet Seed. You then also have to fight Nessa, B, and Raihan all in a row in the finals, who all have an advantage against Rock. Again, slightly alleviated in Shield due to B getting swapped out with Alistair, but still not a great run. Chairman Rose then battles the player with a team full of Steel types, and his underlings from Macrocosmos will also exclusively use Steel types, yet another losing matchup for Rock. And finally, Leon is a bit hard to put a label on since his team varies depending on which starter you pick, but even in the best possible route where you chose Grookey, you still have to deal with Aegislash, Seismitoad, and a Haxorus carrying Earthquake. The other routes are slightly worse for Rock, meaning I'm gonna have to call this an overall L against Leon. Yes, even with Charizard standing right there, Max Overgrowth is a thing. Even beyond gyms and other notable trainers, there just aren't many great Rock types to speak of in the Galar Pokedex. Sure, there's Tyranitar, but he's a Shield exclusive, and as you can already tell, Rock isn't nearly as bad in Shield as it is in Sword, so that doesn't really help the big problem. Other than that, maybe Rhyperior is the next best one to go with. It's a tough call. In Pokemon Sword, Rock loses 8 matchups, wins 1, and goes even with 3. In Pokemon Shield, Rock loses 7 matchups, wins 2, and goes even with 3. It's a bit better, but still not worse than Flying, which wins 2 matchups and only loses against 5. And so, for one last brief recap of the entire series, Kanto's worst type is Bug, Johto's is Grass, Hoenn's is Bug, Sinnoh's is Poison, Base Unova is Psychic, Sequel Unova is Grass, Kalos is Fighting, Alola is Psychic, and Galar is Rock. And yes, since this ended up being so unexpectedly popular, look forward to the best types of every region coming in the near future. However, that's going to require a lot more research, so look forward to some other videos in the meantime while I cook that up. Thank you guys so much for all the support lately, it means the world to me. Again, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos, and I'll see you guys next time.